I am Professor P.K. Mishra, retired professor of anesthesiology. At present, I am working at Apollo Hospital, Bhubaneswar, in India. What I am going to present is the experience of life after death, otherwise, it's commonly known as NDE syndrome. What we know that is a universal truth: man is mortal. But what we believe that our life, our Atma, is immortal. It never dies. This also the same belief of the Egyptians before 2000 BC, and the kings built pyramids for their afterlife things. And so also the China, the earliest human civilization, they also believed the afterlife, which they thought this is a reflection of the present life or a mirror of present life. In other religions, like in Buddhism, they also believe in rebirth. There are five paths: through hell or heaven. And this heaven, as it is described, this vision of heaven, it's preferred by all religions, and they are the articles of faith. So why heaven? Because heaven is considered as good. If when you look upwards, everybody says heaven is upwards. When you look at the upwards, in the day it's beautiful, in the night it's also beautiful. That's why heaven is considered as a place for God, and it's an article of faith, and it's accepted without demand for evidence or proof. So when we see where the life goes, the staircase of life leads to, it leads to hell or heaven. That's what we're going to analyze a little. What is life? Life is, if amoeba is a single cell, he has got also a life. But in humans, a new life starts when an embryo is penetrated by spores. That leads to an entity that is born. And therefore, technically, a complex, coordinated, continuous chemical reaction goes on and on that keeps our life preserved and oneself aware or self-awareness of self and surrounding as you grow. And this awareness, self-awareness, lies in our mind. What is mind? Mind is a collection of 84 billion neurons, and they act
The human brain contains
like
more than 100 billion
continuous
neurons.
signals.
Just like a
Inside
single ant
the
can
brain,
never build an anthill,
they never
a single
sleep.
neuron can't think
These
or feel
connections,
or remember.
and the number of neurons
A
is
neuron's
the
power is a
same
result
after
of its
maturity, after
connections to
birth.
other
The
neurons.
number do not change,
Each neuron is connected
except
to as
some
many as
olfactory
1,000
cells
of its neighbors.
and hippocampus. And what is death? Death is or as we clinically call it, a clinical death. That is the cardiac death. When the heart stops or stops working, even without, in spite of all health, drugs, and everything. So eventually that leads to first brain death, then the death of other organs like liver, kidney. It's the brain that is more important. As we know today, the brain death is real death. And when the brain death occurs, as in the trauma and other places, we can take away the heart, kidney, lungs, etc. to be used in the other persons. So in real life, this is happening. Before a complete cardiac death occurs, it can be resuscitated. And in many in the real world, in many instances, the people face death and they come out of the death when artificially resuscitated. And these people, when they come back to the real life, they say they have a great experiences. I am alive again. I have some great experiences. And this experience they describe as the near-death experience by the scientist. So, what is defined? A near-death experience is defined as a personal experience associated with death or an impending death. Such experience may encompass a variety of sensations, including detachment from the body, a feeling of levitation. That's the definition given in the Wikipedia. And now the neuroscientists understand this NDE is a recognized entity or syndrome which was first coined in 1975. There are many claims of to have had a near-death experience, and people have written books. Some have thought of books and with various descriptions, and some of the books are this Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. She describes her journey from cancer to near death and to true healing. There are also other books, Physics of the Soul, and also there is a book, Life After Death by Deepak Chopra, and the burden of proof he is describing. And so here is another book, The Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife. This copy of the book I have in me, and one can get it. So there are also movies have been made, and where heaven is for real. A child's journey after death to the heaven, and he comes back and describes. And this movie is so touching, people believe on. So does this near-death experience prove that afterlife exists? It's the heaven is different from earth, or it's here present in this earth itself. So coming to the history of this near-death experiences, 1968, Celia Greek published 400 first-hand accounts of out-of-body experiences. And the term FNDE, as I told earlier, has been coined in 1975. In 2003, Grayson Bruce also published death experience by many psychiatric patients in his Outdoor. There are many more studies and case reports have been there. If you see the internet and go to a site nderesearchfoundation.org, you will find several case reports. This is the site. I've just a screenshot of that site. If you see today, there are more than 5,000 cases has been reported as of October 2018, and that includes one of my experiences, my personal experiences. Also in the YouTube there are description of NDE, Buddhism, like this thing. So when you analyze all these 5,000 cases, what do you see? And we find that there is a common element that has been described as the characteristic of NDE. What are those? That a person is aware of being dead, he has an out-of-body experiences, a perception of outside one's body, sometimes observing medical personnel doing resuscitation, which he describes later on, and sometimes there is a tunnel experiences. There is a rapid movement or sudden immersion in light, or it communicates with other persons. There is also seeing, encountering being of lights. Sometimes you also see the reunited with deceased or the loved ones. And people have described seeing one's life flash before one's eyes. They also receive knowledge about one's life and the nature of the universe. And suddenly also they find back inside their own body. But there is a connection to the cultural belief held by the individual which seem to dictate some of the phenomena experienced in NDE. Particularly the Indians, when they describe of Yama, his messenger's Yama, and the Christians, they describe the angels taking away their soul or the body. So this is an artist's impression about the Christian belief, how the angels taking him or her to the God or to the white light or to this afterlife. And in Indian context, there is a picture from a Hindu holy book, Gita, where it is shown that the messenger of God of death, taking away the soul from one's body. So, when we analyze this, what are the stages of NDE? And scientists have divided various stages. The stage of peace, body separation, entering the darkness, seeing the light, entering the light, and 60% experiences stage 1, and about 10% experiences the last stage. What are the clinical circumstances people see the NDE or have the experience of NDE? The cardiac arrest or shock, the perioperative complications, septic or anaphylactic shock, electrocution, attempted suicide, coma resulting from traumatic brain injury, near drowning, asphyxia, or apnea from any cause. So these are the circumstances people see in NDE. And what are these variations? They are 20% have distressing experiences, some have, and many have good experiences as well. There is no relation to religiosity or suicidal background, and it's not affected by psychopathological as in suicidals. But one thing is certain, there is a long-term recall of ND incidents, and they are stable and did not change due to embellishment over time. Now, people have described their NDE experiences even 50 years after and the incident happening 50 years back. Even for me today, my experience of NDE, still I remember it vividly. And what are the after effects they have described? There is a change in personality, there is elevated spirituality and greater compassion, and the brain is altered for the better, and but all do not have the beneficial effect on the brain. And particularly the case of Anita Moorjani, which she has described magical or miracle changes that after during this NDE she had before that she had cancer, and after coming back to this life within 6 months she had a complete cure of cancer on its own. Spontaneous regression did occur in her case. So what is the explanation? There are three broad groups of explanation. As you know, the spiritual that we commonly believe, there is a psychological theory, and there is the physiological aspect of it. I'll go on one by one. Spirituality I need not explain much, but its interesting characteristic is that it's common, this link to the religious belief which I told earlier. And particularly when it is described as an atheist, people believe, yes, there is a life after death. Coming to the psychological analysis of this NDE, there is emphasis on physiology of the brain, and the psychiatrist or the neuropsychiatrist, they say there is a depersonalization model they have described that can explain this NDE experience. And they also described it's a fantasy-based hallucination. And some describe this as an expectancy model. This experience is constructed in the mind subconsciously. And other people have described this as a dissociation model, a form of withdrawal to protect the brain, and also the Barth model has been described. There are various scientific studies have been taken place on NDE. There is a Pioneer study in 2000. It doesn't support out-of-body experiences. And they have studied 63 cardiac arrest reported patients, and several of them had NDE. And there is a von Lommel's study, a cardiologist who saw 344 cardiac arrest patients resuscitated, and 41 described their core experiences. There is an AWARE study is going on, but the results are not yet out. And there is one scientist, Gratian, he developed an NDE experience scale. This scale is found to be useful to differentiate NDE and organic brain syndrome, some psychiatric things. So, coming to the physiological or organic theories, the wide range of physiological theories consider the variables. There is brain hypoxia occurs, there is anoxia, endorphins are released, serotonins are released, and that may have this effect on your brain. And there are other neurotransmitters. And ketamine anesthesia drug relating to NMDA receptors also has got similar effects as we see in NDE. And also people have found that an abnormal activity in the temporal lobe can also have such NDE. And for those anesthetist brains, I must say, they know about the ketamine, that it blocks the NMDA receptors, unlike ether thiopentone, and there is a dissociative state occurs under ketamine anesthesia. The body detaches itself from the physical body and external world, which is called depersonalization or derealization. And in higher doses, there is a cave hole experiences or extreme dissociation with visual and auditory hallucinations. When you see the internet, you will find ketamine works on various receptors in the brain. There are 56 sites, and therefore we cannot say exactly the exact mechanism of action, though majority say that it works on NMDA receptors and produces this experience of brain. During the NDE, the brain is under intense pressure, very difficult to ascertain in which way it reacts or behaves. Okay, we can learn something from the lucid dreams. Lucid dream is a state when the dreamer is aware of the dream, and the mind is also capable of lucid self-awareness while dreaming. This is a known fact and psychiatrists have studied. And the unpredictable nature of the dreaming generates conceptual novelty and innovation. This innovation remains in our mind or memory, while areas involved with emotional and visual imagination becomes more active, which can generate some intense visionary experiences. And it also described there is also abnormal activity in the temporal lobe that have got special effect on the brain or this visionary things. There are some scientific reports published in Lancet and Progress in Brain Research. There are two journals, and that says the damage and direct cortical stimulation of the temporal area are known to produce a number of experiences corresponding to those of near-death experience and including out-of-body experience or sensation of flying, hallucinations, meeting with the persons, and communication and memory flashbacks, sound music. So if you stimulate these special areas in brain, you can have also similar experiences. There are movies that so nicely describes that yes, you can go out of the body. If you see those movies, believe yes, this can happen. So does this temporal lobe problem also affects this kind of thinking in the mind? Yes, it can. And coming to some of the research activities that is being taken place by in the world, and particularly in European countries and America, this ND is getting more attention in research, whereas in Indian scenario it's much less. There is an international association for near-death studies, and in Michigan University, there is one studies they have taken, they have studied, and there is a kind of experiment in rats. They placed the electrodes in the brain, they gave an anesthesia, they did a controlled cardiac arrest, and they studied the brain waves. This was their results. Brain activity measures after the cardiac arrest. So the 6 seconds uh, after anesthesia, suddenly when you make a cardiac arrest, then this is the stage first 6 seconds, this is the waves of the next 6 seconds, and the third 6 seconds the brain waves are active as if they are awake, and they seem to reflect an organized series of distinct brain states, rather than a gradual fade out of brain activity, and this occurs in the last stage. So these stages seem to reflect an organized series of distinct brain states. Okay, and perhaps most surprisingly, recordings are then dominated by stage 3 by brain waves more commonly associated with normal wakefulness during life, so-called gamma wave activity. So this stage is like the gamma wave activity, which is as if you are awake. The brain waves are like that. So in those cases, the neocortex is temporarily inactivated, but generally not too damaged, provided that the flow of oxygenated blood is restored through cardiopulmonary resuscitation or reactivation of cardiac function within 4 minutes or so. In a further analysis also show that this afterlife brain activity is also highly coordinated across the brain areas. There is high level cognitive activity, and in some, these data suggest that sometimes after clinical death, the brain enters a brief state of heightened activity that is normally associated with wakeful consciousness. So, our brain is capable of well-organized electrical activity during early stages of clinical death, like that of your lucid memory described earlier. This indicates highly aroused mental state, and some say it's the survival activity in the brain. And there is a neurochemical explanation. A lot of neurotransmitters are released, and this can affect your brain. There is also tunnel vision can occur when blood supply and oxygenation is depleted to the eye, as can happen in extreme fear and common to die. So, when I was surrounding why I had an NDE, because it was just a syncope, and I found my answer in an article published in Lancet. So many having experimental syncope in volunteers had NDE. So this is my experience published in NDE Research Foundation. This is a case number 4262. You can read it, and the same thing was published in the article in Lancet in 2006. The syncope and near-death experiences. It occurs. The near-death occurs in syncope. So, near death is not dead. The people who experience them are not actually brain dead. They are only near death, a state in which the brain may undergo stress, be deprived of oxygen, and release neurochemicals. Each NDE is unique, doesn't mean that some of them are real trip to heaven or so this imaginary vision just a imagination in our mind. Therefore, the staircase of life just ends like a stoppage of a chemical reaction. So therefore, our religion or many of the religions, they uphold this life after death. Like, but the science refutes the life after death. In this context, one can see this video, what this Sadhguru has said. He says that when you have to go to the afterlife or to the heaven, if you ask anybody, he will say, first you have to die. When you die, your relatives or your body, they leave the body here, they give it to they bury it or burn it or whatever they do it. So, and if you say he's describing, if you go to the heaven, what is there in the heaven? For Hindu, the heaven they have got good food. For Christian, they have this flying angels, and for the Muslims there are this vision, virgin problems and all. And then he says, when you go there, leaving your body, what is the purpose of good food or a virgin woman or an angels without your body? What you'll do there? This is what he says. So that says there is no afterlife, or there is no meaning to this afterlife. Thank you very much.